Hi, it's Alex from Fontain Motors. I thought today we'd talk a little bit about B8 RS4s, specifically because an article that a few of you may have seen already, PistonHeads very recently published a buyer's guide on these cars. We had a good look at this. It's a pretty good article, it's got some decent information in it, but there are a few errors and maybe just a little bit thin on detail. So I thought we'd grab an RS4 and go through them in a bit more depth to make sure that if you're looking to buy one, or even if you own one already, you're very well armed with all the information that you'll need. The headline question: how much does an RS4 cost? Today, if you want a really good one, great specification car, nice colour, low mileage, proper maintenance records, you want to be budgeting about £30,000 for a really tip-top one. If you're maybe not quite so fussy on having the lowest mileage car available, something in the area of £25,000 should buy you a decent example with good service history. Cars like the limited edition tend to be a little bit more expensive, maybe a couple of £1,000s. The Nogaro edition referenced in the PistonHeads article, whilst it was a lot more expensive when they were brand new, it really was just a cosmetic package. They didn't sell particularly well. In fact, a lot of the UK allocation remained unsold when the cars were new. They were pre-registered by dealers and actually have a pretty poor level of specification. So whilst they do pop up for sale now and then, look a little more closely, and a lot of them, despite being expensive, are missing pretty basic things like heated seats or Bang & Olufsen speakers. My money would go on a well-specified standard car for less money every time. Differences between a standard A4 and an RS4. Article covers the main points, and the one everybody thinks of obviously is the big flared box wheel arches. But what can make a really surprising difference to the appearance and desirability of an RS4 is one of the optional styling packs. Without a styling pack, sitting next to a car with one, they can look a little bit plain. There were two options available on this front. You could have matte aluminium styling package, which gave you lots of extra, as the name suggests, matte aluminium trims around the car to offer a little bit of a contrast. Alternatively, you could have gloss black styling pack that de-chromes the whole car, gives you nice things like the piano black surrounder on the radiator grills. And this is probably the most desirable one. It's an option that a lot of people actually really hunt out for, in that it makes the cars look quite a bit younger and certainly more aggressive on the case of a black car like this one. Seats. The standard fitment seats in a B8 RS4 were actually these Super Sport seats, or RS Super Sport seats, given their full name. If you had no additional options on the seats, they came with leather bolsters and Alcantara centres, and they were available in black only. If you went for full leather, which I think was only about £400 as an option, you got the choice of Sol Black or Lunar Silver. Sol Black probably made up the most of sales, but the Lunar Silver sold a few as well. In terms of the seat choices, you could actually have the RS bucket seats, which were a very similar design to those that were popular in the B7 RS4, although where in the older car the buckets made up the majority of sales, probably because a lot of people felt that the standard seats weren't that sporting in look or feel. In the B8 RS4, the standard fit Super Sport seats made up the majority of sales because they're an excellent compromise between support, comfort and everyday practicality. The bucket seats were a fairly expensive option as well. Gearboxes. 7-speed S-tronic or double clutch gearbox. Not generally problematic. In fact, very rarely problematic. I think only a very tiny percentage of owners have any real issues with them. They're not quite as smooth as a traditional torque converter or Tiptronic type gearbox, particularly at low speeds or if you're in stop-start traffic. And there are the very occasional slight lurch at very low speeds that's simply a characteristic of the gearbox, and sometimes it can be to do with the gearbox's cooling strategy as well. So Audi have done things with the gearbox control to make sure that the oil doesn't get too hot and that the clutches last a long time. Article mentions that the front final drive, which is down there somewhere, needs an oil change at 20,000 miles, and that's correct. But it does miss a much more important one, where at 40,000 miles you change the oil in the S-tronic gearbox itself, you do again the front final drive, and you also do the rear final drive and rear differential oil. So that's all 4 of the drivetrain oil changes every 40,000 miles. Fairly expensive to do all 4 of them together, in that, you know, they can be a couple of £100 each one, and it does add up. But oil is relatively cheap, gearboxes are very expensive, so we like to make sure that they're done pretty close to the recommended schedule, which is 40,000 miles. The article does make some slightly confusing comments on drive modes, and you can in fact have any combination of settings you want. The whole car can be aggressive, the whole car can be soft, or you can mix them up. So if you want to have the engine and gearbox in their normal settings, the suspension set to be comfortable, but the exhaust noisy, you can do that. Brakes and suspension, and alloy wheels for that matter. Brakes on RS4s, very, very large brake discs. Yes, they are fairly expensive to replace, but you'll be pleased to know that generally the front brake discs last something like 30 to 40,000 miles under normal use, and the rear discs a little bit longer than that. So you're not going to be replacing them every 10 minutes. There have been some complaints and problems with vibration through the steering or the brake pedal. A lot of people think that's simply down to warped discs, but often it's not. It can be caused by warped discs. It can also be caused by a damaged alloy wheel, or even incorrect installation of brake parts in the first place. If you've had an alloy wheel refurbished recently as well, if there's paint in a place there shouldn't be, that can also cause a vibration. It's very important not simply to throw brand new brakes on if you do have that kind of problem, and find the root cause instead. Suspension. DRC Sport suspension was part of Sport Pack, as the article details quite well already, but misses the mark slightly on taking care of it. It's implied that if you have a problem and are experiencing knocking or a fault with the suspension, you simply need to drain and recharge the system. That's 2 of the 3 steps. But if you are suffering from a leaking damper, the only fix is replacing it. So the system is drained, the damper or dampers at fault, and it's often the fronts on a B8 RS4 that go wrong, are replaced, and then the system filled and repressurized. Filling and repressurizing the system does require specialist tooling. The dampers are empty when they're supplied new. We do have the equipment and tooling on site to carry out this work. Alloy wheels. Again, as the article states, a fairly plain looking 19-inch wheel was standard. The vast majority of people went for 20-inch wheels that were part of Sport Pack. Now, Sport Pack does not automatically give you the V-spoke alloy wheels. It actually gave you a free choice of any of 3 different wheels, all at the same price. You could have the rotor design alloy wheels, diamond cut, grey spokes, cut face as they are here, the same wheel in bright silver, or indeed the V-spoke. Steering. Another component of Sport Pack was dynamic steering. Dynamic steering was a variable ratio steering rack that let you tweak its settings to make it a little bit more reactive or a little bit more chilled out, depending on your preference. This system actually got some fairly bad press when the cars were new. A lot of motoring journalists didn't like it, didn't rate the system, but having spoken to a lot of owners and spent a good amount of time in the cars myself, it works pretty well. I think the criticism was quite unfair. If you're used to a car with a fixed ratio steering rack that a lot of normal cars do have, it can feel a little bit hypersensitive if you're not used to it, but actually you adapt to it very, very quickly. In practice, it simply makes the car feel responsive and agile, and if you do want to relax, it's got a comfort mode, turn it off, and it becomes light, easy, chilled out. In the real world, it simply isn't a problem. So, in conclusion, which is better, a B7 or a B8 RS4? An argument that will go 50 pages every time it's asked on any forum. B7s, modern classic, are getting a bit old now. They need plenty of TLC. B8 keeps the awesome V8 engine, revs even higher than the B7 does, but it's wrapped up in a more modern, more usable, more practical package. And you can still buy them in lovely condition with low mileage that are very, very usable. If you want to have a big, normally aspirated, high revving V8 while you still can, it's got to be the B8.